All right.
So,
We're
so
back.
basically, the thrust of my life story, my father's, is that at the time that science fiction was informing the public that time travel was a concept, it was something that might be developed in the future, it was actually being developed. And that's one of the primary thrusts of science fiction is to make things that are under development seem fictional, to make science, actual science, seem fictional. In fact, it's not really germane to this interview, but Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein had desks that were adjacent to each other at British intelligence during World War II. So some of the main progenitors of science fiction were intelligence agents.
Mm.
But so basically, we've had three generations having that concept of time travel, and that's been misinforming, and it has altered people's understanding of time travel because time travel was just the next step in technical development, but it was kept secret. And so when I began to reveal what was accomplished in the project that I was in, people thought, well, this person must be lying or crazy or convinced of something that didn't happen. But I mean, our colleagues were some of the most distinguished Manhattan Project physicists. I mentioned Harold Agnew. There was an incident in which I was at the Los Alamos National Labs, and there was a physicist repairing one of the chronovisors, and that was Dr. Edward Teller. So some of the main principles on the Manhattan Project were also on Project Pegasus, and it wasn't magic. It was just the state of technical development at that time, but it was made secret because of the ability to use teleportation to put troops precisely where they were needed on the battlefield. That was their principal plan and the reason why they were keeping teleportation secret. And chronovision would, and in fact did, enable them to have a superiority in terms of intelligence gathering.
So on that specific point of moving troops, why hasn't the government used it, or do they?
Well, I was in the winter 1971 lecture by Don Rumsfeld, who was the defense attaché to the project, at the Surrealist Cultural Center site when he explained the fact that, our families and country were grateful and proud of us that we were participating, that we had to appreciate the fact that the technologies were secret and they were national security secrets, so we should never talk about them. And he explained in regard to teleportation that we had found in our analyses of World War II that the majority of our troops, something like 60%, had been killed or wounded, not on the front lines from, let's say, direct combat, nor in the rear areas from shelling, but in the intermediate grounds between the rear areas and the front line, like when troops were being called up to the front line. They were being, for example, shot from behind by friendly fire, accidental ordnance from our own troops. They were drowning in marshy, wet areas, saturated soils. They were being picked up by snipers beyond the front lines and so forth. So Rumsfeld explained how they were keeping teleportation secret because they wanted to use it to put troops precisely where they were needed on the battlefield. You could storm battlefronts by having Marines jump through teleports at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina and be right there, right where they had to be on the front lines of combat. Now, the reason that was a mistaken idea, and I believe an actual mistake in military decision-making, is when I was serving on the project, we were jumping into the Leah. It doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down, but actually it was defunct when we were being sent there. One day we were teleporting into the Leah Harvey Junior High School grounds in Santa Fe. And one of the boys arrived in a fountain that should have been shut down but was leaking, and there were about 3 inches deep water in the bottom of the fountain, which is where he arrived standing up, and he lost his feet because his feet arrived later. They arrived a split second later. And he actually had his feet severed from his ankles as if his ankles had been passed through a bandsaw. And so the reality of the situation in terms of the plan to use teleportation is that if the Navy SEALs or U.S. Army infantry stormed an area with water, it would put the arriving troops, the troops arriving via teleportation at risk of dismemberment and death. Now, in a controlled setting, when we establish these at airports, we're going to be able to control the conditions upon arrival, just like in the same way that we don't allow a truck to be parked on an airplane runway, because it could risk a collision, the death of the people involved and the people on the plane and in the truck. Mm-hmm. So in a similar way, we could keep the arriving areas for our teleports at major airports, for example, where you have water. And then as we fill in that grid in greater and greater delineations and smaller and smaller distances, and literally implement teleportation at the neighborhood level, where you could live outside of Phoenix and teleport into your office in Scottsdale every morning. We're going to be able to control the way in which jump rooms are used to contain the person, and the teleports are maintained, so there is no water. In the same way that we make sure we don't overfill a plane with too much fuel so it explodes or whatever. In other words, we're going to be able to control the arrival so there will not be the risk that water poses of dismemberment. But so the first reason they kept it secret is they weaponized it. They wanted to use it as a technology for military surprise and arrival and surprise. The second, more philosophical reason they kept teleportation secret, as they did the other time travel technologies, is they would be disruptive. And by that I mean disruptive technologies are so advanced that they would eliminate entire industries and job categories if they were introduced. And then the third reason was just they were afraid that the technology would be destabilizing inherently in society in terms of, is the public ready to be operating on this level of sophisticated, transport? Now, I take the position that the people have a right to the best available technology. And so the record has shown that when new technologies replace old jobs, more wealth is created for everybody because people can work at nicer jobs at higher salaries. So, for example, somebody who is a baggage handler at an airport could work, out in the hot sun pushing suitcases on and off of airplanes, could work in a climate-controlled depot directing, let's say, goods that are being shipped via teleportation to the appropriate, addressees. Could be working in a climate-controlled depot rather than out in the hot sun moving, people's luggage around. They could be working in a teleport receiving station to direct goods in the right direction. So in other words, all the jobs that would be lost would be replaced by better and more jobs. That's actually the true history of the introduction of more advanced technologies. Mm. Because anytime you can do more with less inputs of time, energy, and matter, that's inherently liberating for the people involved.
So
yeah.
As I said at the beginning, I knew that this story is, pretty involved, but I do want to go back and I want to get the clearest sense of the timeline with you and your father of okay. we left off at he went to work at the second company. I'm sorry, what was it called?
Well, he graduated from Lehigh University with a BS in electrical engineering in 1951.
Well, no.
He was admitted
we don't have to go that far back. I'm good on that.
He was admitted to Eta Kappa Nu, which is the Engineering Honor Society. He went to work for a year at Okanite in Paramus, New Jersey. And then in 1952, October 52, a couple months after the July 1952 overflight of Washington, he was ordered to report the next Monday at Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility where he worked on the Ramjet and other high-performance jet aircraft from 1952 to 55. I don't know what he did in 55, 56. He might have been at CF Braun. But then from 56 to 64, he was at the Thomas A. Edison Research Laboratory in West Orange, and that's where he repeated Tesla's teleportation experiments. Then they closed the Edison labs in 64, and he thought that was the wrong decision to do. Then he was at another company. It could have been Braun or some other company from 64 to 66. And then in 1966, he was hired by a subsidiary of the Ralph M. Parsons Company, which was called Parsons Jurden, Jurden Corporation. Mm-hmm. And I know it's at that time that he must have been secretly taken inside the time travel program, because I first teleported with my dad from New Jersey to New Mexico and back in the winter of 1968, when I was 6.5 years old. I was then officially brought into Project Pegasus as one of the American school children participating in the fall of 1969, when I was age 7 going on age 8. So that's basically the timeline. I was then in.
And then what?
In Pegasus in real time until the end of the summer of 72. But we had been moving. Well, let me knock this down. Hold on.
Yeah.
We had been going. We went, for example, from 1971 to 73, and we were also traveling to the past and future. So, there was also an accidental teleportation from 71 to 91, and we jumped back from 1991 to 71. So, I went as far back via chronovision as 100 million BC, and physically as far forward as the year 2045 during those 3.5 years of real-time participation in Pegasus from fall of 69.
You went to 2035 via Montauk Chair?
No, I went to 2045 via a device they were calling a Stargate. Of course, they dropped these terms in the mass media, again, as science fiction, to make science fact seem like fiction, which was at the Stargate device. A Stargate is a device. There may be natural Stargates, but the term as it was being used inside of DARPA was to describe a device that is simply just a big Tesla teleporter. And they needed a big one. It was the size, it went all the way up to the ceiling of the basketball court at the Cerritos Cultural Center in New Mexico, because they were sending us 75 years into the future, physically. And instead of 3 seconds, as it was taking us to get from New Jersey to New Mexico in real time, from Curtis Wright, in Woodridge, New Jersey, when we were jumping from that sort of sequestered compound, that basketball court in New Mexico, to the year 2045, it was taking us 30 seconds. It was taking us 10 times as much time to get 75 years in the future rather than just to jump across country in real time. So that's what a Stargate is simply a very large Tesla teleporter.
No.
So we would run up this, ramp with no stick rubber on the ramp, so we wouldn't run off the ramp and slip and fall and hurt ourselves. We'd run up this no stick surface up the ramp and through a notch of densely deep, electro blue, kind of that deep holographic, very pretty deep holographic blue, and jump through, a door about the size of an elevator opening at the base of the gate, at the base of the device, and be in the Vortal tunnel for about 30 seconds, and then we would pop into view on the grounds of this industrial park in the year 2045, walk in a building and interact with the personnel there, where they were giving us little canisters with microfilm upon which had been encrypted summaries of events and conditions and personalities and so forth that were newsworthy between the mid-1970s and the mid-2040s. So that was one of the ways that they were using time travel to advance the intelligence function. And then we were jumping home through a teleport that was there at the building.
And what did you see in 2045?
I saw a society in which all forms of transport that rely on the internal combustion engine had been eliminated, in which the air was clean and civic living was good because there were no cars, because the built and the natural environments had been integrated in a very beautiful way. Like when I would walk in the building, in the lobby, it was just choked with houseplants. By 2045, we learned that houseplants are extremely beneficial. The supplemental oxygen from houseplants are extremely beneficial to human health. And so this whole interior of this intelligence community headquarters, not headquarters, but office building, were just choked with houseplants. People had computer screens that were recessed into their desks. So they had like a keyboard in the desk and then like this screen that was banked and recessed into the desk.
What was this building?
This building was an office building somewhere in the American Southwest where Project Pegasus personnel, and I presumed it was the Southwest. It could have been North Carolina for all I know, but I was presuming it was the Southwest. But it was where a team of members of Project Pegasus that were located in 2045 were producing and then encrypting on microfilm basically information that was relevant to the years falling between the mid-70s and the mid-2040s, that 70-year period, so that we could take that microfilm and jump back to the past with it, and thereby giving the United States Defense Department and intelligence community essentially the history of the future, at least the history of the future on that timeline. And that's what we were doing. So, Pegasus was primarily an intelligence gathering program and secondarily a time-space technical development program.
And when did you stop participating in the program?
We were all summarily kicked out of the program at the beginning of the summer of 72, but then that was a ruse because several of us were called back for an additional summer in New Mexico, and I was one of them. And then I was dismissed from the program just as a summary dismissal. In other words, in these secret programs, they temporarily just kick people out so that somebody doesn't end up knowing too much. So I was summarily, just dismissed from the program at the end of the summer of 1972. And there were some later things that happened in my life that related back to that. But I was done time traveling in real time by the end of the summer of 1972 when I was almost age 11. I would turn 11 in September of 72.
And your father was no longer part of the program either?
No, he was still attached to it. Of course, he was in one of those need-to-know positions where if he had violated his security oath, he would have been assassinated. So with those types of personnel, they could keep them on for years. But I just mean the cadre of American school children who were involved, any one of whom could have blabbed to anybody about what we were doing. We were kicked out after about 3.5 years of service, and they told us at the time that that's just what they did with people in these types of programs. Mm-hmm. With the participants that they brought in who weren't, hardcore career, technical intelligence and military personnel like my dad. My dad was all of us, by the way. He not only had a class of, a top secret clearance to be working on this type of technology, but he was a major in what was known, and may still exist, it was known as the Second Reserve. The Second Reserve was an Army cadre of just ordinary Americans, school principals, engineers, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, whatever, who would step up and become our mainstream military and political leadership in the event the country was invaded and taken over, and our mainstream military and political leadership was captured or killed. I might have said yesterday, I said it to somebody in a recent interview, it's hard to believe, but the principal national security threat that the U.S. intelligence and military were concerned about during the Cold War, during the 60s and 70s when I was in Pegasus, was a land invasion of the continental United States by the Soviet Army. So my dad had little orders that he was supposed to follow in the event that an event like that happened. He would be brought into this shadow military reformulating the country at the major level. And that status as a major in the Second Reserve, complete with a false credentials that was in the name of one of his Polish-American friends from Summit Hill, Pennsylvania, where he grew up, who was killed during World War II. I think his name was something like Henry Przybski. I'm going to look that up in Pennsylvania. But so one of my dad's high school friends got killed during the war, and he assumed his identity on the U.S. DOD identity card that identified him as a major in the U.S. Army.
So
during the war, he'd just been a private in France and Germany. But he was actually, the whole time he was working on these black projects, he was unofficially a major in the U.S. Army. He had the identity to allow him to get on and off of military bases and defense contractor locations with the status or rank of an Army major.
Did your father leave the program, or was he still there when he passed away?
Well, he retired in '84. He had had a heart attack in '77 at Parsons in Pasadena, where he lost a third of his heart tissue. At age 67, which would have been for my dad May 3rd of '90, he died in January of '90, shortly after being rejected by Cedars-Sinai. He was going to be the oldest heart transplant recipient, and they decided not to give him a donor heart in late 1989. He was very depressed during the holidays, and then he passed away on January 8th of 1990. So he was actually going to be, he was actually at UCLA I think he was going to have the transplant at UCLA, because I had been working with Norman Cousins at UCLA in the early 80s, and I was going to have Norman go over and meet my father when he was there in the hospital. So I guess the transplant would have taken place at UCLA Medical Center, but at the Center for Health, or the hospital there. But so I don't know what he did after he retired in 1984, but I know he was still consulting on time travel, because one day after that occurred sometime between '84 and '90 during his retirement, I walked behind him in our living room where he was reading a technical paper, and it showed somebody walking. There was an illustration of somebody walking forward through the spiral of time. It was like a drawing that was supplementing this technical paper. So he was at least still reading technical papers about time travel immediately before his death in 1990.
And so when he brought you into the program, was that the common thing as far as like children or the children involved in the program were the children of the people working on the program?
Well, it was commonplace during those years when they were needed to bring children into secret intelligence projects, military operations, and technical projects like we were part of. When usually the father, sometimes the mother, sometimes both, were either attached to the executive branch in some capacity, like a lawyer for the president or something like that, or a sub-cabinet official of some kind, the intelligence community, and the military. My dad was not an executive branch official, but he was a member of the CIA, with the rank of a major in the Second Reserve of the U.S. Army. So it was commonplace during those years, basically the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the height of the Cold War, for people in those three areas of government to, if kids were needed for a project, to volunteer their own children, because that was kind of viewed as a moral check on the unethical practice of conscripting other people's kids.
And how did your mother feel about it?
Say again?
How did your mother feel about it?
My mother initially had not been told. She actually had been deceived that the learning lab I was placed in to prepare me for time travel was simply a Harvard College or Harvard University directed experimentation into specialized learning techniques involving gifted children. So she was initially, in fall of 1969, lied to by the government that that's all I was becoming part of, was an educational experiment for gifted kids. But in summer of 1971, my dad revealed to her that I was teleporting across country and we were actually even time traveling. And hold on, the kids are having fun here.
Oh, that's cool.
And my parents had the worst argument of their marriage when my dad revealed that he had, was side streaming me in a dangerous intelligence project. Kid, hold on, I'm on the phone. Come on. I'm on the phone. Come on. No water fight. Have the water fight outside. Okay, so there's 4 kids here, so I apologize. But anyway, so she had initially been deceived, as presumably all the other mothers were. And yet my father had no moral compunction of involving me, because from his perspective, time travel was going to define the human future. Teleportation, for example, he knew was going to become a standardized form of transport in my lifetime. And he felt he was just bringing me into the future in the way that a primitive human being would be, if they put their children on their shoulders and crossed a river or an ocean or something for, to migrate to, happier hunting grounds or whatever. That taking your kids into the future with you is just basically part of the human experience. And he thought we were both being very privileged to be in the program. And the reason he asked me to tell everybody in the family and then tell the whole world about what we had been part of was, from his perspective, we had been part of something great, and I should tell the world, and that's what I've done.
How does a child keep such a big secret?
They don't, and I didn't. I actually, when I sat down and I tried to wonder why my siblings were amnestic about, any memory of what I had said to them in childhood, how I'd been in a special program for years. There were 8 separate incidents where I said something to them about the program. And so I wasn't keeping project secrecy. I was even telling my friends in school because I wanted to be rescued from the project. So
you didn't like doing
I
the project.
Well, it wasn't a matter of not liking it. I just became alarmed when I realized that they were having the kids in my group select an alternate name, and then we were known by that alternate first name during our whole project experiences. And I had an untoward conversation with one of the children on the project who I knew as Kevin, who insisted that his name was Scott. And that alarmed me because I realized the kids in the program were being brainwashed. And that's when I began subverting the project when I was on it. I left a note behind this phone that had been half ripped out of the wall in the Baton Memorial Building in Santa Fe. I left a small toy from my Captain Crunch box in a mud puddle out at the old school site in Lamy, where we were being medically examined and cognitively tested after we would teleport to Santa Fe. By the way, Bill Richardson, the future governor of New Mexico, was taking the role of the kids as we were arriving there in Santa Fe in that summer of 1970 period where they were getting us familiar with teleporting, between New Jersey and New Mexico and back. So one of the untold aspects of Pegasus is that some of the functionaries within the project became very prominent American public servants. Donald Rumsfeld and Bill Richardson. Also, I was at lunches in Albuquerque for the Bushes, both senior and junior, and for Bill Clinton in a separate lunch after they were informed of their future presidency. So another aspect of the time travel cover-up is that future presidents have been apprised of their presidencies and briefed decades in advance. And when I was in the second defense technical project I was on in the early 80s with a young man from Hawaii named Barry Sapporo, who now uses the name Barack Obama, both of us were informed of our destinies as president. So I'm the first of the post-war presidents, or at least those who were briefed and told they were going to be president, to reveal to the American people that that's secret, because I think it's unconstitutional that that's being done. But it is being done. So my guess is that the individual who was told of this person's future presidency in this round was probably Hillary Clinton.
So wait,
I think Hillary's going to win.
So you were present when President Obama was told, or this is something you've been informed of?
I was present in lunches in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, when, for example, George W. Bush got right in my face and joked, "Andy, have you heard? My daddy and I are going to be president." And he laughed. He might have been drunk because he was very animated. And then I was sitting next to Bill Clinton on Bill Clinton's right when a young Bill Clinton, we're talking circa 1969-70, was talking about how he was just adjusting to the fact that they had revealed to him that he was a future president. He actually said during that lunch, Phil, he said, I remember what he said because I have an eidetic memory, so I remember things people say. He said, "Fellas, I know you all work for the atomic research community, and I know you're always doing amazing things like building more destructive nuclear weapons. But fellas, some mornings I get up and I look at myself in the mirror and I have to pinch myself and I say to myself, me, Bill Clinton, a future American president? Well, fellas, that dog don't hunt." In other words, I was sitting next to Clinton as he was remonstrating about the fact that they had just recently advised him that he was a future president.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then what was Hillary saying a couple of years later when she started dating him when they were freshmen at 1Ls at Yale Law School? She was going all over that campus bragging, "My boyfriend, W.J. Clinton, is going to be president." She wasn't saying he's smart enough to be president. She wasn't saying he's going to run for president. She wasn't saying he thinks he's going to be president. She was saying, and this was quoted by, for example, Roger Morris, not Roger Stone, but Roger Morris in his book Partners in Power. Hillary was saying, "My boyfriend, W.J. Clinton, is going to be president." And they knew. Because Clinton had been told. So this is part of my story. And then when we were in the jump room program in the early 80s, I wasn't present when Barack was informed, when Barry, as we called him, was informed. But his future presidency and mine were being openly discussed that summer when we were in training for the jump room program, for the Mars program.
Mm. By whom?
And just the CIA people present. My father, Brett Stillings' father, Thomas Stillings of Lockheed CIA, Stanley Ann Dunham, the putative mother of Barack Obama, Ed Dames, the instructor, and people they were talking to. In fact, Obama's supposed mother, I don't know if she was his birth mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, probably, based on the shape of the long faces that they had, they probably were mother and son, biologically speaking. But she brought it up again at our going away dinner, which was at the Creamery restaurant, which today is the Creamery Pub, the Creamery Tavern, on College Avenue, right near College of the Siskiyous. If you're ever in Weed, California, you might want to go over there and get a beer, because the restaurant that used to be on the street side of that tavern, the tavern entrance is now over on the right side. But back in 1980, that was a restaurant that had all these rich cream-based restaurants in its window. People just used to stand there and salivate at all these cheesecakes and everything in the window. It was just incredible, the desserts there. It was famous for it in Northern California. And we had a going away dinner for everybody in the program except Brett and his father left the previous night to go back to Los Angeles. And during that dinner, Stanley and Dunham was talking again about, you're sitting here having dinner with the first black president of the United States. So, and then I was told that summer by my father. My father had said, Brett Stillings' father, Tom Stillings, had said to Brett, when Barry got up and walked towards Ed Dames during a break in our schooling, during the class, he said, Brett, how do you feel being in a Mars project like this with a future president? And he nodded, Mr. Stillings nodded towards a young Barack Obama. And before Brett could answer, my father thrust two fingers in the space between our respective desks. I was sitting in front of my dad, and Brett was sitting in front of his father. And my father thrust two fingers forward and, looking at me, said, two future presidents. And then later, when we were driving Barry up to the airport at the Hoopa Indian Reservation in Siskiyou County there, so that Barry could fly to Portland and then fly to Hawaii to spend some time with his grandparents in Hawaii. His mother must have still been in Indonesia at that time. I don't know, but that was the story. When we were driving back, I said, Dad, do I really become president? And he said, yep, so does Barry, except Barry becomes president first. He becomes president in his mid to late 40s, and you become president later in life. But he didn't tell me what year.
And was your father the only one who told you?
No. I remained friends with Courtney M. Hunt, who, like my father and Ed Dames, was one of the four people we can identify who served on both DARPA's Project Pegasus and the CIA's Mars Jump Room program. And I remained kind of personal friends with Courtney, not real that close, but I'd occasionally have dinner with him in Chatsworth, where we both lived out in the West San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, and would frequently call him to pump him for secret information. And he would sometimes kind of cooperate because he was career CIA. And I said, in 2000, I called him and I said, Courtney, do I reach the White House? And he said, yep, but I don't know how you get there. So I have confirmations from two people with lifelong career connections to the CIA who affirmed that I'm a future president. So the ethical conundrum I was left with was, do I tell the people or not? And I decided to tell the people, because the American people aren't aware of the fact that it's not true, as David Icke says, that American presidents are selected. In fact, that quote goes back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said American presidents are selected and not elected. But I don't believe that's the case. I think American presidents legitimately run for office, and there's a kind of a management of leading candidacies by the government and the media to kind of arrange the small group of people from which we choose. But I don't believe it's a complete setup. I believe there is an active competition for the office. But what they haven't been told is that the winners are being apprised decades in advance of their presidencies. So presumably there's somebody in the race that, if I'm not elected, I was clearly one of the people who was told he would be president. But presumably Trump or Clinton or whoever's going to win has also already been told. And see, that's why I was kind of angry about your piece. Not to jump on your case again, but I have very significant information to share with the American people, and it's difficult information to comprehend, and yet it's information that the mainstream media and the American people are owed. That the advent of time travel by 1970 upset the protocols by which we select our chief executive, in the sense that the winners of the presidential election are being told of their destinies as president. That was not within the contemplation of the framers of the U.S. Constitution.
So, just in the time logic or time travel logic here, the idea is that they're told, but they still run a legitimate campaign and are legitimately elected.
Yeah, exactly.
But
people always get this one? Yeah,
how was the first time?
What
was the first time? Like in this scenario, they go to the future, find out that this person is going to be president, and then go back in time and tell them. But the first time, they made it without knowing.
Well, I couldn't really hear what you're breaking up. Let me say this. What's happened? There's people who are alleging in the conspiracy community, the so-called truth movement, right? A lot of it's a conspiracy theory, that American presidents are selected, for example, based on blood. There was that little girl in Paso Robles who found that every president, except Martin Van Buren, has been a cousin of the others and a grandson of King John Lackland Plantagenet, who was the English king when the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. Okay, now that's maybe, since John Lackland lived 800 years ago, that's virtually tantamount to saying, because of the diffusion of genes, that's tantamount to saying every U.S. president has been a Western European. I probably have King John's blood just from my Danish side, okay? As does probably every other Western European, because there's been intermarriage in Europe across national boundaries for centuries. So it's all probably his blood, when there were only, 1 million people in England, whatever, has probably gotten into everybody. Every Western European descended person, including probably a large part of the African American population in the U.S. because of intermarriage between whites and blacks. But so there's this conspiracy that says, okay, American presidents are being selected, not elected. First stated by FDR and then picked up by conspiracists like David Icke. That's not true according to my comprehension. What's actually occurring is that every 4 years, different people and some of the same people are running for the office again. But that decades in advance, the winners of those discrete races have been at least apprised, as I was, that you're a future president. Get psychologically prepared for the presidency. Okay, but I wasn't told when I would be elected, so I don't know whether Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama were given the precise years of their presidency. Probably not, because if that had been the case, since I know Bill Clinton was told, I don't think he would have given that terrible speech at the Democratic Convention in 1988 if he knew that he was going to be president in 1992 and elected in 1992, a mere 4 years later. I just don't believe he would have jeopardized his chances by giving a 90-minute speech or whatever it was, an hour and 15 minutes, something. Okay, but I do know that Clinton was told. I know that both Bushes and then Obama and I were told. That's 5 individuals, 4 of whom have since become president. And so that gives me, I think, as we would say in the law, I think that creates a rebuttable presumption that in one of these elections, 2016 through 2028, I'm either elected president or vice president and then succeed to the office. Because my father said in no uncertain terms, no, son, you are a future president. Now, unlike the other 4, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, I made a conscious choice to reveal to the American people that I was told I would be president. I'm not predicting I would be president because I don't have the original information. I have the hearsay from my father and Courtney Hunt. And I also have what was implicated, what was implied by the lunches I had, and interactions I had with both Bushes, Clinton, and Obama. So those 2 data sets support the apparent situation that I'm in, that I'm a future president. But I can't say to a personal certainty that I know I'm a future president because I don't have the original information. All I can say is, look, a briefing process has occurred in which people who reach the White House or who the government decides to convince they are going to reach the White House let's say because maybe there's somebody like Joe Biden or Dick Cheney who reached the vice presidency, they're told they're going to become president for whatever reason, and maybe some people are being told who don't reach the presidency, but who the government just thinks have leadership potential. Like look at Mary Jean Eisenhower at the People to People Ambassadors Program. She could be president, right? And there's many people in the country who could be president. But anyway, all I'm saying is what actually happened. I'm saying I was briefed that I would be president, but I'm not predicting it.
So it
would be wrong to predict it.
So you are allowing for the possibility that they tell some that they don't know for sure, or that they.
Yeah, I'm allowing for the possibility. I'm saying this. I know that 4 men who I met who were told in advance they would be president have been our last 4 presidents. That's a mighty fact. I know that I was told. And in light of the fact that 4 who I met and broke bread with, had meals with, and got to know to that extent, and of course Obama was in the jump room program with me. I roomed with him for a couple of days at College of the Siskiyous, and we were in jumps together. Okay, so I know that since the 4 men who have been our last presidents were told, that the fact that I was told is a disconcerting fact. I mean, it may be true, but I leave open the possibility that since we may be selecting from multiple timelines, maybe there's a larger class of people that they've told that include future presidents, future vice presidents, and then people who will seek the presidency or the vice presidency and not reach it, or people who have leadership potential who reach the presidency or vice presidency or political prominence on other timelines. And then maybe just even a larger group than that of people that just decide to tell that for whatever reason. I don't know. All I know is that their accuracy regarding Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama suggests that the fact that I was told is meaningful. I don't know whether it means that I'm inevitably destined to be president, but it certainly means that the government has information about me that I might be, at least might be.
So,
and here I am. I'm running in 2016, and I've pledged to run